Rand Paul got to question the CEO of Moderna. And let's watch.
Mr. Bancel, Moderna recently paid NIH $400 million. Do you believe it creates a conflict of interest for the government employees who are making money now off of the vaccine to also be dictating the policy about how many times we have to take the vaccine?
Good morning, Senator. Indeed, we recently made, before Christmas last year, a $400 million payment to the NIH for an old patent that they had developed, not related to COVID, but useful in the development of a COVID vaccine to pay them for their work. It's for the US government to assess how that money should be used.
Do you think it creates a conflict of interest for the same people deciding the policy of how often we have to take the vaccine to also be making money the more times we take the vaccine? Yes or no?
This is for the government to decide.
You have no opinion on whether or not it creates a conflict of interest.
Isn't that something? They're the smartest people in the world. Why wouldn't you keep taking your COVID policy from these criminals? He has no idea. If a $400 million, almost $500 million paid to the NIH, who then takes that money and distributes it to scientists who say whatever Fauci wants him to say. Because you don't get money if you go against Fauci. That's why he can have such a stranglehold over the narrative around AIDS, the AIDS vaccine, AZT, and now COVID, the COVID vaccine, lockdowns, masks, all that stuff. Because anybody who goes against them isn't going to get part of that $400 million that Moderna just sent to them. That's how they do it. And this guy is the CEO of Moderna. He's like, I don't know, is that a conflict of interest? I don't know. Plus, they also make money themselves personally. So even if you're working for the NIH and you have assisted in creating a medicine or a vaccine, you're entitled to some of that cash. So, okay, so that's just up front. I'm burying the lead. I don't know why I did that, but here comes the lead.
Is there a higher interest or a higher incidence of myocarditis among adolescent males 16 to 24 after taking your vaccine?
So thank you for the question, Senator. First, let me say we care deeply about safety, and we're working closely with the CDC and the FDA to
Pretty much a yes or no. Is there a higher incidence of myocarditis among boys 16 to 24 after they take your vaccine?
The data I've seen from the CDC actually shown that there's less myocarditis for people who get the vaccine versus who get COVID infection.
You're saying that for ages 16 to 24 among males who take the COVID vaccine, their risk of myocarditis is less than people who get the disease.
That is my understanding.
That is not true, and I'd like to enter into the record 6 peer-reviewed papers from the Journal of Vaccine, the Annals of Medicine, that say the complete opposite of what you say. I also spoke with your president just last week, and he readily acknowledged in private that, yes, there is an increased risk of myocarditis. The fact that you can't say it in public is quite disturbing.
So that guy's a liar. And he doesn't know. He knew exactly what he was doing. He wasn't answering the question. The question is it higher incidence of myocarditis for boys 16 to 24 years old? And it is way higher from the vaccine than from getting COVID. And he knows that. And how do I know he knows that? Because I know it. Because I've known it for months and months. So you know that guy knows it. The guy whose $100 billion fortune depends on this vaccine. You don't think he knows the incidence of myocarditis? What he tried to do was so now Fauci and all those guys, they got him to do bogus studies that couldn't tell the difference between an 85-year-old woman and a 16-year-old boy. So they said, oh, there's no higher rate of myocarditis after the vax than there is after COVID for everybody. Well, he wasn't asking them about everybody. He's asking them for males 16 to 24 years old. And now we know conclusively that they do have higher incidence of myocarditis from the vaccine than they get from COVID-19. We know that. You know how I know that? Because the goddamn Heart Association in America said so. COVID-19 infection poses higher risk for myocarditis. Oh, no, this is heart attack and stroke. This is from them. This is the wrong thing. I'm sorry, I have this wrong. They say the overall risk of myocarditis, inflammation of heart muscle, is substantially higher immediately after being infected with COVID-19 than it is weeks following the vaccination for the coronavirus. That's a new study. That's what they were saying. Among men under 40, there were an estimated 4 extra cases of myocarditis associated with the first dose of the Pfizer vaccine and 14 extra cases with the first dose of Moderna vaccine for every 1 million men vaccinated. That's under 40. The risk rose with the second dose for all 3 vaccines studied and was the highest for Moderna's, which had an additional 97 myocarditis cases per 1 million. For unvaccinated men under 40 with COVID-19, there were 16 additional myocarditis. So they're saying if you're under 40 and you get COVID, you're going to have 16 additional cases of myocarditis. Whereas with this Moderna vax, you're going to get 97. So you get more myocarditis from their vax than you do from getting COVID. And that's not a little bit. That's a lot. That's several 100% times more. 200, 300, 400. I don't know. Is that 600% more? Yeah, something like that. So here is Dr. Vinny Prasad to let you know, because it is now undeniable. Vaccine can cause more myocarditis in men under 40 than COVID-19. Just out. I have said repeatedly, Moderna should be banned in men under 40. FDA failed Americans, and this analysis is more complicated. Everyone gets breakthrough eventually. So here's the. This is the incidence of myocarditis after your second vaccine from Moderna. There it is. Here's your incidence of myocarditis if you just get COVID. Here's the incidence after the second dose. So that guy's pretending to not know what I know. Now, I'm a pothead comedian in my garage, and somehow I know that, but the head of Moderna doesn't know that. With all his scientists and all his medical background and everything, they don't know it, but I know it. A C student who went to state school. I know this. And he's going to tell you how they did the bogus studies that said that there was no increased risk. He's going to tell you how they did it because they didn't separate out 85-year-old women from 16-year-old boys. He's going to tell you this.
And the authors are still binning data in big bins. I see there's some news coverage of this that shows this study by Patone and colleagues is reassuring, that it shows that, across the whole population, the risk of COVID-19, myocarditis, and the risk of vaccine myocarditis, blah, blah, blah. Well, stop right there. We're not talking about across the whole population.
That's right.
You see, as a doctor, I'm able to tell the difference between a 22-year-old man and an 87-year-old woman. I'm able to do that. I'm able to tell that difference. And as long as I'm able to tell the difference between a 22-year-old man and an 87-year-old woman, I shouldn't be looking at myocarditis that lump together 22-year-old men and 87-year-old women. We want to know the risk of myocarditis from every single dose of vaccine and from all the possible ways you get breakthrough. I'm going to talk about that more. For a 22-year-old man and an 87-year-old woman, I have no doubt in my mind that the calculus for an 87-year-old woman is going to favor many, many doses of vaccine because the risk of myocarditis for her is very, very low, and the risk of bad outcomes from COVID-19 is very, very high. But there's a lot of questions around young men and how many doses is optimal. Let's talk about that. You can get 0 doses, 1 doses, 2 doses, 3 doses, at least in this country so far. Maybe in a few weeks, they're going to say 4 doses. You can get that many doses as a 22-year-old man. No matter how many doses you get, you will inevitably have a COVID-19 breakthrough. You can get 1 dose and have a breakthrough. You can get a 2nd dose and have a breakthrough. You can get a 3rd dose and have a breakthrough. And I'm sure that even this 4th dose, we have no clinical trial data. God forbid they have any human data. But you could probably get a 4th dose and still get a breakthrough. We have yet to know. We have never seen these bivalent vaccines yet. So what you need to do when you think about the best path, and really, we're already kind of a year late, but imagine hypothetically we're back in time. You have to ask yourself, which has the lowest cumulative risks and the greatest cumulative benefits? Is it 0 doses in meeting the virus? And I think it's highly unlikely that to be the case, particularly for, even 35-year-old, 40.
So he's trying to figure out what's the best. Should you get one? Should you get 2 doses? If most of the myocarditis comes after the second dose, should we just give boys 1? But now that it's Omicron, a lot of people say it doesn't make any sense to get because it's now mutated into being just, it presents as a cold. And even Bill Gates now says that that COVID has a very low fatality rate, and it affects mostly seniors, the elderly, kind of like the flu, but a bit different. That's what Bill Gates is now saying now that he cashed in his stock in Pfizer. But that guy Moderna, he's still playing dumb, like he doesn't know. And there's even so this won't be reported in the news. Why isn't this on the headline of every newspaper? Why isn't this the lead story on CNN and MSNBC and Fox? Why? Because they get their money from Big Pharma, from that guy who just lied and said that there's no difference in myocarditis in boys getting the vax or getting COVID. That guy who just lied to Congress, that guy who just lied to Congress, why aren't they leading with that? CEO of Moderna lies to senator about myocarditis. Because that's what that is. You have to believe that somehow the guy in charge of a couple of $100 billion operation about vaccines knows nothing about them. That's not the headline. That's not the lead story. That's not going to be the lead story. Chris Hayes is not going to tell you about this. Anderson Cooper is not going to tell you about this. And even when they tell you about this on other YouTube shows, they're going to get most of this wrong. I just watched coverage of this on another YouTube channel that has the balls to cover it, so tip of the hat for that. But then they get the rest of the science wrong. Or almost. So here's some more. Let's watch some more. So here now, this is just for fun now because Senator Paul can't believe that. Well, let's watch.
Seen the annals of medicine that say the complete opposite of what you say. I also spoke with your president just last week, and he readily acknowledged in private that, yes, there is an increased risk of myocarditis. The fact that you can't say it in public is quite disturbing. Do you think it's scientific?
And that's not also a headline. That's not also a lead story. They're not going to bring on a panel to talk about that, how the CEO of Moderna says one thing behind closed doors, and then he says then they say another thing in front of Congress. That's not, how come, if that was Trump, it would be the headline for a month. If that Stephen Colbert and Jimmy Kimmel and everybody would be making jokes about it. But Stephen Colbert's going to come out and do another musical number telling you to get a vaccine because his salary gets paid by that. Just the same reason why he couldn't say anything bad about Les Moonves when he had to step down for being a horrible sexual harasser. Because that's where he gets that's where his loyalties are. I get it. Here we go.
Perfectly sound to mandate 3 vaccines for adolescent boys?
This is for the public health leaders to decide, Senator.
You've been advocating for it.
So he asked him, do you think it's sound to get 3 vaccines to 16-year-old boys? And he goes, well, that's up for the health professionals. He didn't say, he said, what do you think? Because you've been out there on TV and anybody who puts a microphone in your face and you've been saying, yes, you've been advocating for everybody to get as many vaccines as possible. But now when you're asked about it, on camera and by an adversarial questioner, I don't know. What do I know? I'm just a dummy.
Interviewed, and you've been advocating for boosters. Do you know when the myocarditis is most common among these adolescent boys? After the second dose. When I spoke with your president, he readily acknowledged in private, that maybe there ought to be a discussion whether we ought to have 1 vaccine versus 2 versus 3. If 90% of the myocarditis comes after the second dose, why don't we have a rational discussion about 1? Marty McCary, a physician from Johns Hopkins, has said exactly the same thing. It's been discussed, and yet we have this ridiculous notion from the CDC. So the CDC says, and I'll ask you this question. Let's start it as a question. Your 16-year-olds had COVID. Your 16-year-old gets better and now has recovered from COVID. You vaccinate them and they get myocarditis. Are you going to give them 2 more vaccines? Your child, give them 2 more vaccines?
Dodge.
I'm not a clinician. I will have to discuss.
You have children.
I do.
Have you?
I'm not the clinician. Well, your kids already had COVID, haven't they? That's what I would have said. Well, your kids already have, because everyone's had COVID pretty much, almost everybody in the country.
Vaccinated your children?
I have.
How many times?
3 or 4 times.
3 or 4 times.
We follow
So the
this.
CDC recommends this, and you're obviously someone who's self-interested in the outcome here. But the CDC says that if your 15, 16-year-old gets COVID, recovers, takes a vaccine and gets myocarditis, is hospitalized with elevated heart enzymes, and is very sick, the CDC says as soon as he gets better, vaccinate him again. You know how many American parents think that that's a rational, reasonable thing to do? Do you know how many countries don't do this for children? Sweden doesn't offer the vaccine for kids under 12 unless they're at risk for severe disease. And I agree with that. I'm not saying never on any of this. I think it's a very reasonable position to say kids at risk or have some diseases that there may be a reason for vaccinating some children. Finland doesn't recommend it for under 12 months. Norway also. England as well. France, Poland, Germany, Switzerland, and all vaccinate 12 and up. So we got half the world who have looked at these studies. There's a study in Israel of thousands of patients, and yet you sit here and act as if you've never heard of myocarditis and you don't think it's an increased risk for young adolescent males, when all of the studies who isolate out people by age have found that, yes, there's an increased risk after taking your vaccine. Pfizer too, but worse with Moderna.
There's an increased risk, Senator. I was comparing it to somebody who gets COVID.
Well, that's also not true either. But there's an increased risk of getting it. But even when they compare it to the disease, there are many papers out there that do show that there's more of a risk of myocarditis after vaccination. So you have to weigh the risk and balances. And you are right, you're going to make less money because you're going to try. They're already trying. The CDC's got it on their schedule. They're going to try to force all the kids in America to do this through school. But guess what? Parents aren't going to do it. They've seen that COVID is not deadly in children. And you're right, it's become less deadly over time. Your market's going down. So you aren't going to make as much money. I'm all for you making money in an honest way. But I don't like the idea that the people making the decisions in government are also receiving money and are now conflicted in their interest.
So why does it take a senator to do that and we can't find a journalist that could do that? Isn't that amazing? You can't find a single journalist to do that to anybody from Pfizer, Moderna, Johnson & Johnson. Nobody, not one journalist will do that. We got to hope that some Canadian guys who fly over to Davos on their own dime can confront one of these guys on the street. That's what you got to hope for. Because Anderson Cooper, Chris Hayes, Rachel Maddow, Sean Hannity, they're not going to be asking these questions. They're not going to be asking these questions. Why do we have to? Really? Is there any more corrupt people in the world than the elected people in Congress? The answer is no. And here they are doing a better job than the corporate media. You know why? Because the corporate media is actually more corrupt than politicians. That's kind of amazing, isn't it? It is. It is kind of amazing to me, but it's true. So good for Rand Paul doing the job that Chris Hayes, Jake Tapper, Sean Hannity should be doing, Brett Baer. But they're not doing. Good on him. And again, how about the people who aren't apologizing? Isn't it amazing? How about the people who came on this show and argued that they should mandate this to children, to kids, to everybody, to men under 40? And they'll never apologize. They'll never apologize. And how about that? They'll never apologize. Shows a lot of character, doesn't it? Hey, everybody, I forgot to tell you this. But the vaccine is safe and effective. It's fantastic. My heart swells 4 times its size with pride over the immune response my body's creating. I'm so happy about it. I get excited. And when my heart's swelling, it's not from the vaccine. It's from pride at the good pharmaceuticals. Also, the vaccine will keep you it will slow the transmission contraction and keep you from getting hospitalized or seriously ill or dead. That's according to the science of YouTube, ladies and gentlemen. So who am I to say otherwise? And I'm not giving any medical advice, by the way, either. This is just for informational purposes. Don't be listening to me. Go to jimmydore.com to see my new stand-up special, COVID Lies Are Funny. For only $10, you get to become a premium member, too. And come see us do our live shows. We're going to be doing stand-up comedy in Milwaukee, Nashville, Honolulu, Los Angeles, Northampton, Massachusetts, Syracuse, New York, Cohoes, New York, Hartford, Connecticut, Baltimore, Maryland, and more. Go to jimmydore.com for a link for all those tickets.